Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third webinar session and the last webinar session for this round, a webinar series on human rights and environmental due diligence in supply chains. We are currently waiting for participants to join us. We had more than 100 registrations for this third session that we are very, very happy about. Let me quickly introduce you to this session. My name is Mareike Brandt. I'm the head of Competence Center Sourcing at the Southern African German Chamber of Commerce, based here in Johannesburg, South Africa. And this session is actually the third session of a whole series. So about a month ago, we had a session on introduction to human rights and environmental due diligence in supply chains. You can find the recording on the website of the Competence Center. I have linked this for you in the presentation and can also share that in the chat. So you can view that, watch that later on. Same for the second session that we had about 2 weeks ago on strategic integration of due diligence and risk analysis, also recorded, also with the presentation. And today, of course, we will be talking about preventative measures, remedies, and complaints procedures. Together with that, so with this webinar series, we are also having a follow-up in-depth training starting on 7th of November. I will briefly talk about, after the presentations, how you can apply for that. The deadline to apply is today. I will also post that in the chat. So afterwards, if you're interested in joining this training program, then please still send us your details to us today. And after this second training program, we are also planning for an alumni event of the companies that went through the webinar series, through the training program, and then would like to exchange further on how they're doing in setting up, implementing their due diligence procedures. Just some organizational remarks. This session will be recorded, as you can see right now. If you do not agree with the recording, then you would have to leave now, but can watch the recording later on. We will only record it until the question and answer section. So there is a bit of privacy and room to ask any kinds of questions. So this will not be recorded, and yeah, so you're free to really inquire and find out what's maybe still burning after the presentations. This session will be about 90 minutes long. Also, the presentation will be shared, of course, afterwards. You can post your questions along the way in the chat. We will take them at the end. And then if you have any technical issues, let us know in the chat. Usually it helps to leave the session and then come back in again. Today, we have 2 speakers with us. You might already know, if you have been with us for 1 or 2 times already, Dr. Jana Heinze, who is an external advisor for the help desk on business and human rights. So she will give us a bit of a theoretical background today on this topic of remedies specifically. And then it's also my great pleasure to already announce that we have Ms. Sarah Schnorbusch with us. So she is the Corporate Social Responsibility Manager at DHG. It's a company from Germany that is sourcing, amongst other things, sustainably produced charcoal from Namibia. And she will talk to us about how they implement human rights and environmental due diligence together with their suppliers in Namibia. So I suppose without much further ado, Jana, I will hand over the floor to you so you can give us the theoretical background on the topic, and I will just go to the next slide for you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mareike, and also warm welcome from Jenny, my colleague, and me from the help desk. And thank you very much for joining us also during our third session. We're more than happy to see many of you back already. So I think we have a lot of participants that really have been with us through all of these webinars. So Thank you very much in also putting your trust in us to present you something new. Well, today's main topic is again about putting human rights due diligence into practice, but with a specific lens on measures as well, on preventive measures, as also on remedy. Next slide, please. Or I think we can skip the next one or two slides. Exactly, how to get started. So the essential steps to at least mitigate your risk. So as we already discussed during webinar number 1 and 2, that in today's globalized economy, the intersection of business practices and human rights has gained increasing attention. So companies, both large and small, are now expected to conduct their operations in ways that respect and also to somehow to a certain extent protect human rights. And this has led to the development of various measures from code of conducts, trainings, audits, certifications, standards, multi-stakeholder initiatives, all with the aim to ensure businesses are accountable for their impact on people and communities. And in the realm of business and human rights, the risk analysis, remember, like a little repetition from webinar number 2, the risk analysis is a critical tool for identifying and mitigating potential human rights violation that could result from business operations. And by conducting thorough human rights due diligence, businesses can assess the risks to vulnerable groups such as workers, local communities, and consumers. And this risk analysis, and I'm more than happy because I could already, there was a little sneak preview on what Sarah Schnurbusch is presenting today. So she will also give you some insights on the risk analysis of her company. So the risk analysis forms the foundation for developing effective measures to prevent, address, and remedy harm. And these measures often include adopting policies aligned with international human rights standards, implementing transparent monitoring system, or creating grievance mechanisms. And the connection between risk analysis and actionable measures ensures that businesses not only protect their reputation, but also contribute to sustainable and ethical practices, reducing the likelihood of adverse human rights impact. So always keep in mind when it comes to measures, there's always there should be a close connection to the risk they're going to tackle. So the starting point, what are the requirements if we talk about preventive measures? Not about remedy, about preventive measures. Always, as a starting point, you should use the results of your risk analysis as a basis for aligning existing procedures, measures, creating an action plan, and implementing risk-based measures. So again, same with the risk analysis, also goes for the measures. You will most likely not start from zero. You will already have measures in place, but they need to fit under the new umbrella of business and human rights, and they should match your risk. So again, like the last time, we've put together some kind of guiding questions. So what measures should be taken to manage the identified risk? Do not just do any kind of measures. So for example, trainings are in general a good measure. Just give them a training and then, it's like ticking the box. So always think about the identified risk, about the structural, causes for the risk, and then think about the measures. Again, get your colleagues on board. Find your allies in the company. So which departments have processes and measures in place to record and address environmental and human rights risk identified in previous steps. So this is also, again, like in the risk analysis, find your allies and see what you already have in place, which existing processes and measures can be used. Are there any indication on how well processes and measures are working that also allow for identifying weak points? Not all of the measures in place might be still in a good shape. So maybe, you have to tweak a little here and there, shape them to the different aim of now addressing or minimizing risk. Which measures should be taken into account and which risks are not yet addressed and covered by measured. So it's always, helpful to look at your company's connection to potential and actual negative environmental and human rights impacts. The connection also determines the responsibility of the company and its options for action. So for example, it is sort of like a different case if you're actively, if you're like the source of the risk or the negative human rights impact. So it occurs, for example, in your own business area, or it occurs in your, business relationship with a supplier and you're contributing. Yeah. So either you're causing the human rights impact, the negative human rights impact, or you're contributing to it, or you're directly or indirectly linked to it. This is kind of like a cascade of contribution. And also on this, cascade of contribution, it depends which measures you should take it into account. Next slide, please. Yeah. So again, this is something to keep in mind, using existing principles on health and safety and adapt them if necessary. Health and safety is one example. HR, human resources, is usually another example. The quality management is an example. So these are like already 3 departments who could be, involved in this whole procedure, compliance and risk as well. In practice, they already indirectly include references to environmental and human rights protection. You can build on that. Again, you don't start from zero. You can start and build on existing measures. And also because keeping in mind that you do not have millions, of dollars or millions of people. Instead of creating entirely new frameworks for environmental and human rights protection, use existing health and safety principles as a foundation, to just get started. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about checking what you already have and then building on that. I think that's always like a good idea. Next slide, please. So this, for example, is kind of like a tableau of measures. They're directly taken from the German Supply Chain Act. So again, if you do not fall under the German Supply Chain Act, you're by no means obliged to do anything. So what you see here is kind of like examples for German companies, what they can do, both within their own operations towards direct suppliers, and that could already be you. Yeah, so you're like, the target group of these measures, or towards indirect suppliers. So you may be not a tier 1 supplier for a German or European company yet, but you may be like in tier 2, 3, 4. And you see, again, depending on the contribution, even if it's in your own operations or direct suppliers, or if you're only like closely or even vaguely linked to the human rights impact, you choose different measures. And we go step by step now through each category. And I'm just going to present you some measures in each category. You will receive the slides afterwards, so you can always, take them, read them again. This is kind of like checking a box to see what is already there and what you may use. But always keep in mind, it always depends on the specific risk you want to address, the specific, connection to the supplier. So it's kind of like how do you say it? It's kind of like you have different options. Let me put it that way. You have different options also to combine measures, because this is also something important to notice. Usually it's not one measure, leads to the success you want. So often in practice, you have to combine different measures in order to really mitigate the risk. So for example, only doing trainings, maybe not enough with a high risk supplier, or only contractual assurances from a supplier will be not enough for a German company in order to really, they're obliged to do it. That is probably not enough. Next slide, please. Yes, so let's go step by step through each of these categories. So preventive measures in your own business area. This is your own company. And this is something, to be honest, I would probably address first, because here your impact is your leverage, is probably the highest. And it's always good to start from there, because this may be something also your German client wants to see from you, in order to check your risk profile. They want to know, for example, do you have a policy statement on the topic on business and human rights? So adopting and implementing something like a human rights declaration, human rights policy, and within this document, this don't have to be long, it can be, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 pages. Usually people do not read more. So keep it short, but clear and structured. So you can describe your own enterprise commitments and due diligence processes. For example, what are your own takes on this subject? What do you already have in place? And also you can, or you should, set out your human rights expectation of your own employees. but also on your business partners. So, the German client or the European client will, check if you maybe have a human rights policy or a code of conduct. And then they say, oh, okay, they take these topics seriously. And the second one would be, and this is also kind of like a repetition from actually the first and the second webinar, embed human rights at a structural level. Yeah. This involves allocating specific responsibilities. Remember from the last webinar, no, from the first webinar, appoint someone, appoint something like a human rights, maybe ambassador in your own company, setting up appropriate bodies or modifying existing one, and introducing like a suitable management system for addressing human rights issues. Human rights due diligence is a team sport, It's nothing for people who run by themselves for 25 kilometers. It's a team sport. It's like football. It's like anything you can imagine. You need different departments on board. And maybe not only in your own company. So you may also find it useful to join sector initiatives or working groups with other companies. And then, issue, implement, and regularly update a code of conduct, internal directives, and procedural guidance. These documents usually set out a concrete and understandable manner your human rights expectations of different groups, your own employees, temporary workers in each department, purchasing, production, HR, super important, and compliance. These are some kind of like internal procedures, internal policies, for example, on anti-discrimination in the workplace. So this is something where probably your closest ally would be your HR department. Always good to have them on board. And then, of course, something that I think more or less on a regular basis, European clients ask their suppliers to train, sensitize, and equip your employees. So this applies to workers in your own area, and this could be also goes on until you're tier 1 or tier 2 supplier. Initiate further training measures, dialogue formats. Doesn't always have to be like a formalized trainings, but it's more or less to listen to your workers, discuss these topics with them, share ideas and experiences, internal events, internal communication channels. Maybe you have a newsletter for your employees, you have a website. Just see, where you can use this topic to sensitize your workers. Next slide, please. And we continue. So this is not all for your own business area. Another like 2 categories of measures in your own business area could also implement risk-based control measures. The purpose of these measures usually to review compliance with diligence processes. So always have to like a control, like a checkpoint at regular intervals, both within your own enterprise and again also could address some of your suppliers. And of course, enforce sanctions when something goes wrong, in response to violations. You should also have, measures, for example, deducting points on an employee's performance review, issue a formal warning, terminating a control, or taking legal action. So again, always keep in mind your own business area, your leverage is usually the highest within the supply chain. It's your own people. You are in control of policies, procedures, measures, processes. Get in touch with your HR colleagues, get in touch with the purchasers, and build something from what you already have. I think this is the most important part for your own business area. And this is also most likely the first thing, again, that people will ask you when they're going to check your risk profile of you. Next slide, please. Yes, audits. So I think audits were already mentioned like within like the first webinar and also during the second webinar. So audits are a very important tool in business practice, but to be honest, alone, most of the cases not sufficient. So audits is something like a requirement. I think probably especially if you're in the agriculture sector, a lot of clients from Europe may already ask you for an audit, or they're going to ask you to fulfill due diligence obligations. So this is kind of like in an escalation process. It's more like if you're coming from a risky country, if you're operating in a risk, sector, then German European clients tend to ask, or want to proceed with an audit. Yeah. Audits are not as easy as it may sound, just send someone, they're going to check, they're going to bring back an audit report, and then you have the security, or, you feel in peace, and it's like, okay, I already checked everything. But audits require certain expertise that companies might not have internally. First of all, language. Yeah. Think of countries, also like India, maybe. So it's not only English, it's also not only like the official language, but also the language of the workers, of the production sites, and that even could go down to local dialects. Yeah. So expertise also in relation to the region and the culture, technical expertise, legal expertise, and of course, yeah, expertise in relation to specific human rights and environmental issues. So it's a very profound assessment of your company. It's like checking, your policies, what you already prepared in step one. They may even talk to your workers. Yeah. And audits can, of course, contribute to the risk analysis, yeah, to have a more profound, deep view about the risk landscape of the region, of the certain supplies. Of course, appropriate contractual control mechanism and also effectiveness assessment. So it kind of contributes to specific parts of the due diligence process. So do not be scared, if someone asks you for an audit, usually they don't want to do something harmful to you, but they're just going to come and check. Yeah? And depending on the audit, for example, completely independent third-party audit, auditors come to your place, they're going to talk to you. Just want to have a very in-depth view. What are you already doing, to mitigate risk, or to even, contributing to preventive measures and remedy measures. Next slide, please. So now we move on, to the second category. So we already had the first category, the own business area. Now we move on to your business partners. So your business partners, for example, imagine you're a tier 1 supplier for a European or German client, then your business partners are already the tier 2 of the obliged company from Europe. So this is, again, also good for them to get more information about the supply chain, more transparency. And it also helps you, of course, completely independent from the European regulation, to monitor your own risks in your own supply chain. Yeah. For example, again, as you already, may already done in step 1, policy statement. You can, of course, also always require a policy statement. That's something companies usually ask for or check the website for. So your business partners should maybe also set out their human rights commitments and the due diligence processes. So it's easier for you to see and check to understand how the other partner, your business partner, is approaching this topic. Draw up guidance and or a code of conduct. Code of conduct are contractual measures widely used. I think probably already some of you might have received the code of conduct from Europe, as well as procedural guidelines, and incorporate them into contracts. So contracts alone by themselves are usually not the most effective, So you know what they say. It's like, oh, okay, I got a code of conduct, I'm going to read it briefly. It's like, okay, signature, send it back, but then the next second you already forgot, what you heard. So use them to specify in a clear and comprehensive manner your expectations of your respective business partners, possibly of individual target group within specific departments. Yeah. Do not try to push your obligations down to the next tier, but try to work together with your suppliers in order to tackle specific risks within your supply chain. Of course, you always, especially if you're looking for new suppliers, it's also kind of like a preventive measure, select your business partners wisely. Yeah. So when selecting your business partners, you should take into account whether they meet human rights requirements or not. And with doing so, you already have some sort of preventive measure in place. You have a good momentum, if you already have, in negotiations, then it's also always good to address this specific topic as well, right from the beginning. Within these, setting up a business relationship, usually you have your code of conduct, but also you can check the policy statements, the procedures that the supplier already has in place. Inform and enable relevant groups. Yeah, again, think about the webinar. I think it was number 2, also about the change of perspectives. Yeah, appropriate actions to inform and equip these groups could include initial and further training measures, both online and in person, communication measures and specific events. Yeah, think of a supplier day, maybe when you invite some of your suppliers, designed to ensure that all your business partners are aware of and understand. That's kind of like the second, probably most important point. They understand their human rights due diligence obligations and are enabled to act accordingly. Again, good momentum is always when you enter a new business relationship, but in any case, it's always good to actively inform, train your business partners as well. That's why, again, maybe some of your German or European clients may also ask you to, for example, do an online training, an online course on specific risks, or they may set up some kind of like a supplier day and invite you, and where they also maybe want to set out their ESG performance strategy. And then you also will be informed. And then, of course, also conduct studies and pilot projects. These purpose of these actions is, always to increase transparency. It's like depending on your risks. Remember webinar number 2. In the end, it's all about prioritizing human rights risk, the most severe, the highly likelihood of, taking place. These are the risks you're going to tackle first. And then you can also start with studies, human rights impact assessments, stakeholder engagement, and of course also pilot projects. This is also the point sometimes European clients tend to, jump to the end of the supply chain. Like I mentioned in, I think, webinar number 1, think about, for example, cobalt from Congo. There are various projects from the automotive industry, for example, in the R. And so in order to, provide for remedy on the ground, and also to make sure that the working conditions, especially for the miners and sometimes even kids, are, improved over the next years. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, sorry, I was was like the same picture. It's like, okay, so we stay with business partners, and like I said in like a couple of minutes ago, it's not the goal, the ultimate goal, to just shift the responsibilities away from you to your next business partners. And again, German or European clients are also not allowed to do that with you. Quite the opposite. Provide support. You can support your target groups, your suppliers, in various ways, both as a pledge company, but also your tier 1 and then the tier 2 of the German companies, by helping them to develop management system, build a greater expertise in terms of knowledge, as well as structures and system in the upstream supply chain. Another step forward, but it's also, I think, again, under the umbrella of providing support, also stipulate the use of certified management system. I think one of you, I don't know if she's here today, we were talking about the ISO norms. So management systems should be implemented in a way that allows for independent verification and regular monitoring. So I think it's always good to familiarize yourself with, certified management systems, but also standards or certifications for your sector, that can always help you in a business relationship. Also, maybe could be like, your entry point to be the supplier of choice as well. And also, of course, implement and regularly update your procurement strategies and purchasing practice. So this is actually like on the intersection between your own business area and with regard to your business partners, as an ongoing measure to prevent or mitigate identified risks. Next slide, please. Yes. And this also goes with the argument of being the supplier of choice. Of course, it's my most, favorable thing to do. It's like to create incentives. So encourage your business partners to meet your expectations. For example, access to networks and tools, preferred business partner status, be the supplier of choice, longer term contracts. I know that these whole, business partner relationships are way more dynamic than I think people from the outside will ever understand. Yeah, they have certain rules and certain dynamics, but I think always to invest like in long-term contracts, maybe even higher prices, also to, give your supplier, good reason to invest, in these things. And maybe even personal financial resources. Again, it's not about shifting responsibilities, it's about jointly working together to address the most severe risks. You do not have to do this with every supplier, but in some cases, especially if you're dependent on your supplier, especially if you want to maybe, turn a more short-term partnership into a long-term or longer-term contract, it's always good to think about your own prices and your own capacity building skills in order to help your suppliers. Of course, if something goes wrong, and this is like the last point on this slide, apply sanctions in case of violations. Contractual penalties, legal action, temporary suspension of a business relationship until there is an improvement or the breach has been resolved. Again, always keep in mind it's not about leaving a country or like always terminating a business relationship. It's more about if in any case you're responsible, exit, but actually the longer you stay with the supplier and work with the supplier on the specific risks, the better. But if you reach, a point where there is no other means, then of course it's your own choice to also leave this business partnership. So more stringent controls. Again, here comes the audit argument. It's like if something goes wrong, you give, room for improvement, you discuss certain corrective action plans with your suppliers, and then you come again after a year and you see that nothing has changed. This is usually the point where German and European clients will be like, okay, I'm out. Or even more stringent, more strict controls, tougher requirements governing transparency and the provision of evidence or compulsory certification. So you see also there's not only one sanction you can choose. There's usually like a broad spectrum, a variety of sanctions in case of violations. Next slide, please. No, here we go. It's the enabling before withdrawal. That's the point. Like termination of a business relationship required is or should always be the last resort. So also, in case you're now the people here in the audience, if you're a tier 1 supplier from a German or European client, do not be afraid that you will not be listed anymore or that the people will not choose to work with you. Because again, also German companies, this is like, communicated from the government, from BAFA. The termination of the business relationship is only the last resort and only if it's a very serious violation. No other mitigating means are available. It doesn't seem promising. Like I said, it's like you already gave the supplier time, nothing is happening. And then you come again after a year. This is usually, the point where company withdraw. But again, enabling should always be the number one choice. Only no remedy through the implementation of measures within a specific time frame. So also do not be afraid. People cannot force you, especially if we speak about like, structural changes within your company, to do that within, Monday to Tuesday. You will always have time. Usually it's sometimes 3 months, sometimes 6 months, sometimes it's a year. So you will have time to improve the conditions in your company. Only if you're like super lazy and you're not doing anything, you're kind of sort of like ignoring or even pushing back. Corrective action plans. That could be companies that may not be in the supply chain of European companies in the future. So always keep in mind, just signalize that you want to work with a supplier, you want to work with the company, and I think that's already like guaranteed to be in the relationship, business relationship. Next slide, please. Yes, so maybe just a brief summary before I hand over to the next speaker. So just a summary, what always, to keep in mind when you set up measures. So of course, the first thing, and usually also a very powerful resource, is communicate your expectations. Yeah. As your clients will do towards your direction, you can also communicate your expectations towards your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supplier. And also, yeah, towards your own employees. I think that's a very powerful resource that doesn't cost any money. Yeah, it doesn't have to be always like the fancy pilot project. Just go ahead and communicate and set out your clear expectations when it comes to business and human rights. And you can do so with your own human rights policy, with your code of conduct, and through different communication channels. Next step is usually building trust and creating capacity, both in-house for your own employees, train them, appoint them, well, first appoint them, then train them, get your allies on board, get the different departments on board, and, be like a force of change for this topic. Building trust is, of course, working with your suppliers instead of just shifting responsibilities and saying like, oh, well, you have to do it. And then the other ones, oh, no, I give it to the next one. That's not human rights due diligence. Human rights due diligence is working jointly to tackle the most severe risk in your supply chain, and only jointly and only together, I think we can achieve like really good results. Yeah, again, team sport, not a marathon you run by yourself. Set incentives. Of course, this goes into the direction of your suppliers, but also your own employees, offer long-term contracts, pay good prices. I know it's hard, the economy is super competitive and usually there's not much room to, to negotiate, but this is also something, be sure that I will also, say this to German companies, with like every time I speak with them, set incentives, pay good prices to your suppliers so they have the resources to, invest in these resources as well. Because if you don't do that, that would be super unfair towards your suppliers, towards people like you, who are working hard, trying to run a business, and then, the obliged company is just passing on the requirements. Yeah, that would be super unfair. So this is something we usually address with the German companies, but also goes in your direction when you work with your maybe smaller tier 1 suppliers. And then, of course, monitoring. Yeah, of course, you trust your business partners, but also like just signing a code of conduct may not be enough. Yeah. So monitor, get in dialogue, set up supplier days, speak with them, and, make these an ongoing topic in your conversation. Like price, quality, and timing. Yeah. ESG topics should be an ongoing topic in your negotiation, in your, working with your own employees as well as with your suppliers. Yeah. Let me see if there's one more slide, but I think, yeah, this is it for the theoretical part. Yeah. Now we have like 7 minutes left. Yeah. So I just want to, do a little practical exercise with you before I hand over to Ms. Sarah Schnurbusch. So remember the case study that we did the last time. So it was all about cashews. Yeah, it was about Zambezi cashews, a rather small company with 100 employees in Johannesburg. Yeah, but they're not only operating in Johannesburg, they also have subsidiaries in Mozambique and Tanzania. And remember, we were talking about the risks they're facing, both within their own operations. Think about the, local workers were increasingly being replaced by migrant workers. There have been some conflicts between the local residents and workers. And last but not least, we also had some health and safety issues when it comes to harvesting the cashew fruit. Yeah, so next slide. And now I'm gonna, monitor. I'm gonna give you like I'm gonna monitor the chat now, because let's get a little bit more interactive now, and let's try and see if we, you heard a lot about measures now, training, code of conduct, contractual measures, and so on and so forth. But let's think about in these 4 categories. Yeah. So what could be, thinking about the risks, migrant workers, your own employees, health and safety, and we already discussed that, I think, the last time, local residents, local communities, what could be realistic measures that we could take? The low-hanging fruit, something we might already have in place. Yeah. And then let's think about more innovative measures. So not only thinking, same old, same old. You know, we have a contract, we're going to give the contract. What could be innovative measures? And then my favorite category, the long shot and the moonshot. Yeah. So also let's be a little, you know, creative and think about what could be long shot measures and what could be even, you know, giving you have unlimited personal staff, you have unlimited financial resources. Yeah. What could be moonshot measures? Yeah. So just think about like 2 or 3 minutes. And again, there's no right or wrong. Just use the chat as Mareike, I think, already proposed. And yeah, just write down some measures you think that could be useful to address the risk that we discovered last time in the case study.
Jana, I think I'm going to go back one slide to the actual case study.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to make it a bit bigger so that people can read it once more if you haven't been part of the previous webinars. And I have posted a screenshot of the slide that Jana just shared in the chat, so you can still think about remedies a bit more, because I don't see any suggestions in the chat yet. But feel free to post your ideas. So what could be remedies for this situation of having a cashew company, and then you will have maybe some issues in your supply chain, could affect the workers, could affect the local communities, as mentioned here in the case study. What could you do to remedy the situation? Of course, this is now a theoretical case, but it's one that could easily be found, probably even in South Africa. So, of course, the moment you do probably any kind of business activity, there will be some sort of impact, for example, on the environment or on the workers that are there. So what could you do if, for example, there was child labor discovered on a cashew plantation? Think about those kind of lines. I think we have discussed possible risks last time. So just fire away in the chat. Oh, I see one. We have skin irritations. And what you could do is gloves and special protective clothing and medical care. That is a very pragmatic remedy, I suppose. Thank you for that. If you have some other ideas, please fire away. Share them with us in the chat.
I think I see one hand. I don't know if you can already. Is it Elisabeth too?
Hi, it's Elizabeth from Everpix. Yeah, my question is really pertaining to child labor. I mean, a lot of the families in Africa, I mean, if they're going to the field to work or they're going collect in the field, I mean, the kids come along. But I think there is a very big difference between just, you know, family doing things together and a child actually working against payment and thus avoiding school. But you know what I mean? It's part of their education is to help mom doing things. What is your point there?
Yeah. I mean, it is, of course, like two different, you know, kind of, you know, human rights risk. I mean, usually if we talk about child labor, we talk about like the most severe one, like you said, for example, working in mines, you know, not going to school, you know, the health conditions are really, really bad. And of course, it's something different if the kids are just coming along. But then again, you always have to check, are they going to school, or is it, you know, it's like, I think you have to treat these two situations completely different. Yeah. And also child labor maybe is a good example for like, you know, the group of long shot or moonshot measures, because in the end, if you simply forbid child labor, that's not gonna change the situation on the ground. So here, for example, a good measure would be increase the salary of the parents. So, you know, the whole family does not, you know, doesn't need the support of the children. You know, that would be, for example, like a long shot measure to address these issues. Yeah, but I agree with you. It's completely different situation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't think we have any other comments in the chat for this particular question at the moment. So I would suggest that we just are going to go on to the next presenter. Jana, if you agree, we'll hand over to Ms. Sarah Schnorbusch now. As mentioned in the beginning, she works for DHG. It's a German company that, amongst other things, is importing sustainably certified charcoal from Namibia, and they are working together, of course, with their local suppliers in Namibia in implementing the human rights and environmental due diligence regulations, although they're actually not directly affected yet by the German law, if I understood that correctly from the introductory talks that we had in preparation for the session. So this is an especially interesting case where you can see that even if a German or European business isn't yet directly affected by the regulations, they might still want to or feel the need to basically have to implement these regulations, because in the end, their buyer that is directly affected by the law might try to pass down their due diligence obligations to them, or might at least ask them what they are doing with their suppliers. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Ms. Schnorbusch now, and she will share her own screen for the presentation. So I will stop sharing now. And we are seeing your presentation. If you could just go into presentation mode. Yes, we can see it. Perfect. So I give the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to thank you for the invitation, and I'm delighted to be here today to present DHG and our approach to sustainable management, especially in Namibia. DHG is a sales and consulting company and was founded in the year 2000, and we currently employ around 111 people, and over 90% of our business is B2B related. Our product groups include growing media and special soils, barbecue charcoal and briquettes, and wood fuels, and we are delivering to all major retail brands in Germany and Europe. Just a brief word about me. I've been responsible for sustainable management at DHG since May 2023. And today I would like to inspire you how companies can be active shapers of sustainable transformation using the example of socially and environmentally responsible procurement. I'm referring to our charcoal product area today because firstly, it is the area of the highest with the highest turnover, and secondly, because we source most of our charcoal from Namibia. Of course, the other product areas are also subject to our due diligence processes. Yeah, so let's dive into our approach to the German law for supply chains, and yeah. As the Act is relevant for companies with more than 1,000 employees, we are not subject to the German Supply Chain Act, at least not as a direct obligation under the law. But we decided early on to fulfill the associated obligations in full. On the one hand, because we know our supply chain very well, and on the other hand, because more and more of our customers are approaching us with questions and requirements. So the law places a lot of obligations and requirements on the companies concerned. And here you can see again a summary of the obligations. And today I will focus on the topics of integration, complaint procedures, and remedy. Let's have a quick view on our charcoal production supply chain in Namibia. As you might know, bush encroachment is estimated to affect up to 45 million hectares of Namibian land and has severe negative consequences on key ecosystem services, such as agriculture productivity and groundwater recharge. Our charcoal comes from governance-supported debushing projects, and we do not obtain the raw materials from Namibia, but leave the added value locally, contributing to the development of the national economy, and we make a significant contribution to social sustainability in the country. Our aim is to demonstrate the sustainable use of bush biomass and to strengthen the capacities of local players along our supply chain. It is very helpful for us and our engagement to know our supply chain as good as possible. And as you can see, we have more than 3,200 employees directly and indirectly connected to the DHG in Namibia. The law demands a risk assessment, and the process begins with the question of which negative impacts occur where in the supply chain. In order to create the necessary transparency, we analyze our supply network, potential and actual negative environmental and social impacts using a broad-based risk analysis. In addition to our company's own internal information and dialogue with relevant stakeholder groups like our suppliers, we collect information on industry and country-specific topics, as well as product and company-related topics. If we have gaps in information, we close them with the help of external experts. And when assessing risk within the supply chain, it is first advisable to cluster all companies by category and industry, country of origin, and turnover limits. We are using information from the World Governance Index and heat maps from our partners like Amphori. For a first overview, we use the CSR risk check, helping us to identify local risk on the basis of a selection of sectors and countries. We also use our own questionnaires for our suppliers based on the Amphori BSCI requirements, and we do field visits. We visit our partners on a regular basis by ourselves and via the NGO Earthworm, for a view from the outside with a more neutral look. And further support could be, for example, the water risk filter, a scarcity filter, or a biodiversity filter, for example, from the WWF. Generally, in Namibia, we are facing risk in the area of human and labor rights, in particular child and forced labor, health and safety issues, or something like unpaid overtime, etc. But of course, ecological risk and risk in governance topics also apply in Namibia. Special mention is made here to the 3 conventions relating to mercury, POPs, and hazardous waste. Luckily, however, these are not relevant for us. So our focus in environmental risk lays on air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. Okay. So this first abstract analysis is followed by a specific risk assessment based on further research. For example, for low-risk suppliers, it is sufficient for us to initially sign the code of conduct. For suppliers with a high risk, either due to the country in question, we have a self-disclosure form to fill out. The aim is here to wait and to prioritize the risks, and depending on our ability to influence and the nature of the contribution, we have different measures to mitigate the risks. And just as an example, if companies have been audited by organizations such as Amfori BSCI or FSC, the risk can be ruled out. And we can classify them as a low-risk company in our supply chain. To summarize, South African companies can implement the requirements for German companies by carrying out their own risk assessment. Furthermore, training programs for employees in social and environmental awareness are very useful. And we also recommend audits by NGOs because they can help to meet the standards. In compliance with the law, we have also drawn up and published a policy statement on respect for human rights, which you can find on our website. It includes topics like the establishment of a risk management system, description of human rights and environment expectations, and the appointment of a human rights officer. By the way, that's me. Furthermore, we oblige each of our business partners to sign our Code of Conduct for Suppliers, which is based on the principles of the International Labour Organization, and it's also published on our website. We implemented a lot of preventive measures, which mean that we have hardly had to take any remedial action so far. We work closely with our suppliers as well as with NGOs such as Earthworm to develop concepts to minimize identified risks. You can see an example of this here with a picture. Before our collaboration, there was no comprehensive protective equipment for the workers at all, either when harvesting the bushes or during further processing in the factories. Together, we have worked out that it's now part of the necessary standard for all our partners. And among other things, we double-check this on a regular basis during our visits. And as you can see, we have reached some of our goals. All companies have signed the Code of Conduct and all factories are FSC certified. We have all processors audited by Amfori BSCI, and we have reached complete transparency and traceability of the supply chain down to a few hectares in the bush. In our own business unit, we offer intensive employee trainings on the law, and we have developed purchasing guidelines on sustainable procurement. In order to minimize our environmental risk, we are very much engaged in our partnership with our suppliers for more than 20 years. One of our long-term goals is to switch the production of charcoal from the traditional kilns into retorts in order to further decarbonize our supply chain. And at this point, I would like to underline once again that we always rely on partnership-based cooperations with our suppliers. And in our opinion, this is the key to success, especially in due diligence processes. In the event of violations, German companies must implement immediate measures to remedy the violations. In the long term, preventive measures such as audits help to improve the conditions in the supply chain. And like said before, cooperation is the key element. And for example, adapting working conditions and improving safety precautions helps companies to ensure that no contracts are going to be cancelled or penalties have to be paid in the future. The last topic I want to talk about are complaint procedures as a core element of due diligence obligations. Every company under the law must have a grievance mechanism in place through which internal and external persons can inform the company of human rights or environmental risks or violations in its own business operations and in the supply chain. We at DHG also see this as a kind of an early warning system, and it should be easily accessible, and it should pay attention for data protection or to data protection. We at DHG are working with a software supported system for all employees in the supply chain and in our own business unit. We will implement the system on our website and in our suppliers' plants in the next months. And right now we are already working with an own email address. It is already accessible, and we inform the workers in the plants with notices and further helpful documents, making it easier for them to access the system. For us, one of the most crucial factors in selecting the system was a low threshold access through the use of many languages. For example, workers can make their entries in Afrikaans, and we automatically receive the text in our language, like German or English. So this is very important to encourage people to make entries that they can use their own language. Our time is a time of challenges like climate change or social injustice and the urgent need for sustainable action and the transformation of the economy. And these issues are constantly being driven forward and put into practice at DHG. And the understanding was there early on. And in my opinion, this is the most important realization in working in supply chains, that it would not work without working in partnership. Tackling the targets together and supporting each other helps to fulfill the supply chain law. And now to conclude, here's another example from our more than 6 years of cooperation with Earthworm. Together, we have been able to significantly improve conditions at one of our key suppliers. And this year, we have also launched 3 new projects. This time, we will focus on the improvement of living conditions, the reduction of emissions, and the use of byproducts from our charcoal in Namibia. Yeah, so that's it. And thank you for listening.